Okay, so let's take a look. So, what is the Great Awakening? What do you guys say for this? It's not easy. Sometimes people always kind of confuse the second Great Awakening with the first one. Sometimes that happens. But what's the first Great Awakening? What do we see? Yeah, yeah. No, it's definitely a revival of religion, right? It kind of brings people back to religion. What were some of the main ideas of this Great Awakening? Yeah, Michael. Yeah, well, there's a rationalism to it, but it's kind of like it's combating enlightenment at the same time, right? That's kind of if you look up the Great Awakening, and that's why we're kind of learning both the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening together, because the Enlightenment is an idea of using logic to answer all of your questions, using reason. That's why it's called the Age of Reason. Is also what the Enlightenment's other name for it. And you look at the Great Awakening, which is kind of a time period where they're combating the Enlightenment because it's trying to say they want to use emotion, your devotion to God, to bring you to kind of guide you in the right direction. Versus logic, versus reason, they're kind of on two spectrums, right? So when you look at the Great Awakening, what other things can you say that it did? We're going to talk about this stuff, but let's just say, you guys take a guess on some things that happened. Great Awakening, yeah. Yeah, it expanded the different types of forms of Christianity, right? It expanded all different types of churches, ways in which church sermons went. Think of it this way: before the Great Awakening, church sermons are very like strict, kind of like lectures. Like I'm not saying like a TED talk because TED talks can be very interesting and very informative, but they're very just straight lectures at you. They're just kind of like yelling at you, saying that you're sinful, you're awful people. Just saying for like an hour, right? The entire time. But that changed with the Great Awakening. The way that these sermons go, the way people think about religion, the way they interact with religion, all changed because of the Great Awakening. We'll go into that specifically. Okay? Cool. So, with that being said, some things that we need to make sure we understand is we need to make sure we understand the Enlightenment. Okay? Because this is a direct interaction with the Great Awakening. As I mentioned already, if you don't know the Enlightenment, then you won't understand why the Great Awakening happened in the first place. Okay, all right. So the fact that religion before the Great Awakening, as I mentioned already, was very, very strict, very focusing on people are sinful, are just sinful, and that you are destined to go to hell or heaven before you're even born, before you even did anything. Okay, remember the whole idea of Puritanism, the predestination, where you could just be born and you could be acting like a normal person, and all of a sudden they say, well, you're going to hell because God says you're going to hell. You didn't even do anything yet, right? And that kind of created this aura of religion being very non-personal, very, very strict, very fearful, very tense, right? And people were kind of turned off by that idea, okay? Now, the Enlightenment kind of pushed that even further. Enlightenment was kind of like the effect of how religion was, okay? Because these people were religious people. And this is like a mirror slide of what I showed a while ago. If you go back all the way to the Glorious Revolution, it's the same slide. All I did was I brought it back to show you, because this is kind of going along with what we're going to talk about with the Great Awakening. So you might not have to copy the exact same thing because you already know about it, right? But the Enlightenment happens because of this tense use of religion, and also the fact that the monarchy was kind of pushing their limits on all things, right? So obviously you need to know that John Locke pushed those ideas of really questioning authority and questioning. I mean, specifically, the reason why he questions authority in England as well is because in England, they're Anglican. So they're both the head of the religion and the head of the state. So it's almost is a direct going after religion as well, right? Not like saying there should be no religion, but the fact is that they're challenging the leadership of the religion too, okay? And yeah. The Glorious Revolution is basically the revolution that happened in England, right? So the Enlightenment is a movement that happened in England, but it's going to have its impacts on the colonies. So the reason why the Great Awakening, that happens in the colonies, not in England, right? We talked about it previously because it had a direct effect on England. Like the Glorious Revolution was a revolution that happened in England, that they overthrew the monarchy and installed a constitutional monarchy, where now Parliament has more power in levying taxes, which is going to play a big role in Unit 3 when we see all the different acts that come in. It's because Parliament's passing those, not necessarily monarchy itself. Okay, but the reason why we're talking about the Enlightenment again is because they're having its effects on the colonies, the colonists, is probably more major for U.S. history than in England. Okay, and this is kind of the jumping point to a lot of the revolutionary ideas, right? The fact that natural rights, and we're going to look at kind of how the colonists took some of the ideas of John Locke and just changed some wording. It's kind of like a really bad job at copyright, right? Where they use inalienable rights instead of natural rights. It's the same thing, but they just want to not use the exact same word, right? The fact that they use life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness rather than life, liberty, and property. They're basically just taking those ideas from John Locke's mouth, basically, right? But some other things you need to understand about Enlightenment. Even Rousseau, another Enlightenment thinker, Jacques Rousseau, had put on separation of power. So these are all ways in which they're showing that using logic, using reasoning, was a kind of a growing trend going on. And because of this growing trend, a lot of the leaders of religion thought that they needed to change the way in which they teach Christianity in the colonies. All right? So the Great Awakening is really that response. Because less people were going to church, less people really cared about religion as much, and they were focusing on exactly what the Enlightenment thinkers wanted them to do. Use logic instead of emotion. But the Great Awakening was trying to change and try to bring people back to religion, right? So just like how the Enlightenment is based on logic, Great Awakening is based on emotion. Okay, they're trying to bring people together, become closer to God. All right, and there's really going to be two major Great Awakening ministers that are pushing this idea. Okay, it used to be that God was a spiteful ruler and we were all sinners. That was what religion used to be based off of. The Great Awakening makes it where God is a forgiving person, and if you embrace God, then you can be saved. And if you do the right thing, then you'll reach salvation, right? So just like how we look at religion today, right? That Great Awakening causes that change to happen, right? And their main goal of the Great Awakening was to change the individual to do the right thing in society. Before that, they thought that people are just evil. They go to heaven and hell based on what God already chose for them to do. Okay? The two ministers you need to know for the Great Awakening. First one, Jonathan Edwards. Right? Jonathan Edwards is seen as kind of the origin of the Great Awakening. As I told you before, I took a class that focused on all these major sermons, kind of all the major pieces of writing from the Puritan era all the way to the Civil War. And let me tell you, his is a doozy, right? It's the sinners in the hands of an angry God, right? It's a doozy. And the reason why it's a doozy is because is the whole concept of it is that we are sinners at birth. We're all born evil. However, because of God's grace, because of what he provides for us, we have to act in the right way for him. And if we do that, then we will be in God's message. Okay? So he's trying to tell everybody, we're all evil in the beginning, but if we do the right thing, then we'll be exactly the way that God wants us to be. We have to do it not just because, we're afraid of being in hell, but it's the right thing to do. Okay? And that's what, at the beginning, these were how he would preach to people. And he had some pretty good crowds. It got the message around. But the person that really exploded the Great Awakening was George Whitefield. He was the most popular Great Awakening minister of them all. Now, he didn't have like 40,000 people, but he had 10,000 people go to his sermons. And I'm sure you've seen some programming before where, like they have those massive crowds and they get hit with the Holy Spirit and they start shaking and falling over the place. That's what George Whitefield, his sermons were like. Where it was so emotionally driven. As in, like I mentioned to you before, sermons are for the Great Awakening where a lecture. They were yelling at you, saying how you're evil. And all of a sudden, George Whitefield comes in. It's like happy. Everyone's happy. It's all excitement. And literally, Ben Franklin had wrote that he was a very logic-driven person. But he went to one of his sermons and he was like captivated by his words. Like he would just say certain things, and it was like, wow, I really love his speeches. And this now grew the Great Awakening even more than ever before. Now, when you take a look at some of the writings that we're going to look at some today, that's what the worksheet's going to do. When we take a look at some of the effects, the impacts of the Great Awakening, okay? First off, they accomplished their goal. It got a lot of people coming back to the religion. A lot more people started to go to sermons. A lot more people started to be dedicated to God, all right? Because of how popular things have gotten, they started to create colleges solely for the purpose of making new ministers, along with the new Great Awakening mindset, right? So we see a lot of these colleges that we know are very popular today were solely created for this purpose. But obviously, as time progressed, they started to teach more different things. But they were created to make more ministers, okay? There were more Christian missionary work. We're basically trying to convert people to Christianity. This has now increased even more. And we see this happen as time progresses, okay? Religious liberty strength. So now it's the Enlightenment created where you're starting to question authority to protect your natural rights. The Great Awakening had an effect that was similar to that, but it allowed for the religious freedom to stay intact. As in, they didn't want someone else telling you should be a certain religion. They wanted to basically push the idea that you can be your religion. And this ends up happening where new churches start to form, okay? Where because of this popularity, more people wanted to associate with a certain religion based on the area. And we'll see this when we look at the middle colonies. A lot of them were Quakers, but they also had different subgroups as well. Same thing in the New England colonies, same thing in the southern colonies. They all had the different kind of their most popular religions. But they're all usually all Christianity. It's just different forms of it. Or Protestant or Catholic. They're all just different forms, okay? So that's why I kind of mentioned here. There is some divisions between certain groups that they're all Christians, but they all have their own subgroups of Christians. And you'll see some of the combative kind of nature of some of these colonies because they are different religions. For instance, if you've ever seen the show John Adams, right? One of the famous scenes is when, and we'll watch a portion of it next unit, where they are debating on whether they should rebel against Britain. And the New England colonies are like, the colonists are saying we should go full rebellion, while the people from Pennsylvania are saying we shouldn't. And it gets so heated to the point where they say, well, you know what, your Quaker beliefs of being peaceful doesn't do anything for me. And John Adams says to Dickinson, you being a Quaker and being a pacifist doesn't help me in my situation. And they start almost getting to a brawl. And this starts to happen a lot of times throughout the history because they're all part of Christianity, but they have like these smaller rivalries between each other. Okay? Now, the interesting thing about this, though, is it does divide amongst the different Christian groups, but they are united under Christianity. All right? So that there builds a deeper tie that they're all under the banner of Christianity. It's just different in how their beliefs are and the traditions. Okay? So an example of how things have really grown to show a tension between the authority and people's natural rights, right? Whether it's because of the Enlightenment or the addition of the Great Awakening as well. And there's a lot of different examples you can talk about. This one's I picked personally is the Zenger case. Now this is in New York. John Peter Zenger was writing a piece about really criticizing the monarchy, right? And this was a no-go at this time. Criticizing the monarchy on an open source for everyone to read was deemed to be against English law, right? According to the monarch, right? So they tried to put him on trial, and he was acquitted. They had ruled that they're allowed to criticize the authority, and this kind of set the stage for the freedom of the press, okay? Now, there's a bunch of different examples we can go into, but this is kind of one I picked because it's actually pretty easy to understand, okay? Now, that's going to be technically the end of Unit 2, right? That's the end. So we should jump into the worksheet now. It's going to talk about kind of the relationship between the Enlightenment thinkers and the Great Awakening thinkers based on certain primary sources. All right, so let's go to that now. All right, so what I want you guys to do is get into like groups of 3 to 4. There's 4 documents there. The first part of it is just going to make a summary of your document, okay? So I want you to read your document and then make a summary and then to discuss your summary with your partners. And then after that, we'll move on to the next part. And I'll show you what I mean when I get there. Alrighty, so as you guys see on the board right here, this is the document, what it looks like. There are 4 documents, so if you're obviously in a group of 2, just means you just have to split it 2 by 2. Obviously, a group of 3, I would say you do each of you do 1 document and you work on the last one together. All right, so you're going to read your document, okay, and then you're going to complete the summary that's in this box here. Then you should discuss the summary with your partner, so you guys can kind of teach each other what you saw, okay. After that part, we'll all discuss the summaries together so we're all on the same page. And then we'll go on to the last 4 questions, which is basically analyzing all the sources you looked at. Okay?
What? Good. I don't know what you're saying.
Hey guys, are we ready to talk about the summaries? All right. So let's take a look. All right, so let's go summary 1. All right, so this is document 1. Pretty simply, right? Obviously, this person is on their deathbed. All right, they're dying, and this is kind of like the accounts of really their last thoughts and everything. Obviously, I think it was what it says 4 days. It was on her deathbed. Okay. So, what are some things you saw that were? Hey, how would you summarize this? What was she saying? Yeah.
She was basically saying that she no longer fears death and believes that she's in the Lord's hands now.
Yeah. Just think of it this way: before the Great Awakening, people were constantly afraid to die because they didn't know whether they're going to heaven or hell, right? And all of a sudden, now you see accounts of people being like, "I'm okay with dying. I'm going to be with the Lord." And I kind of circled this one spot here. Why do you mourn when I rejoice? You know, it says that those that die, O Lord, are blessed, right? They're happy. It's not saying they're looking to die, but they're okay with that. They're happy to be with the Lord. So there's a change in how people's perceptions of death and perceptions of God, right, that happened with the Great Awakening. Now let's take a look at the second document. What's the summary for this one? It's a little bit different. It starts out one way, and then it completely changes what he thinks of God. What was his original thinking? What was his original relationship with God? When you first look at the top here, it says that he recently went to a sermon with George Whitefield, the guy that was like making everyone happy and excited at the sermon, right? Starts off saying, you know, I was always tense all the time. I was stressed about my relationship with God and if I die, what would happen. And then one day he had a dream that he had talked with God, and all of a sudden now he's like a born again. He's like alive. He's changed completely, right? So now it's like this change. This kind of represents the Great Awakening because it's like this change had occurred for a lot of people. Instead of it being afraid of God, now he's now rejoiced. He's happy that God's in his life, okay? And that's a big change that you see over time. Let's look at the next one. This is actually a famous document by Benjamin Franklin, all right? the importance of a virtuous life. This is another one I had to read for that college course. The whole document's very interesting, but this is only a snippet of it. All right. So, what was the summary of document 3? Yeah. Yeah, the whole, you're just looking at the title, right? The importance of a virtuous life, living by virtue, right? Saying that basically religion's teaching you to be good to other people, doing the right thing. That's what life is about. Always doing the right thing in every situation. The interactions between one person and another is going to push whether you are going to be, deemed as a good person, whether it's about religion or just a general person in general in the public. Okay, being perceived by other people, right? And that's what Benjamin Franklin is really focusing on. Living the virtuous life, the interactions between one person and the other, the dealings between man and man, right? That's what it's going to be really focused on. Because I was trying to find the other part I was really focused on. But that's what he's trying to say throughout this. Right? If you look at the larger document, the full thing that he writes, he keeps going on about that idea. Like doing what you're supposed to do, not drinking this much or reading more, and all these are all things a virtuous person would do. So you should live by that message, right? Then you look at document 4. What are some things that you say here for a summary? What did you say for document 4? First, he really pushes the idea. Yeah, exactly. So he kind of mentions a lot of the great immunities, right? States it in these last 2 paragraphs. Talks about the major concepts in which the Enlightenment's really pushing onto him, and really even the Great Awakening is pushing both those ideas together are pushing these major concepts, and he kind of mirrors a lot of what John Locke says. Talks about original liberty, the state of nature, natural rights. These are all things that are John Locke-esque writings, okay? And he tries to push that as those are the greatest things that we have to live by. And whether you are living by religion or you're living just by just having individual freedom, these are the key concepts that both things are pushing for us to live by, okay? So 2 documents really focus on the impact of religion, the Great Awakening, while 2 of them are kind of a mix, right? They're kind of, one of them is really about the Enlightenment, and the other one kind of has a mix of the 2, right? Ben Franklin's is kind of interesting because it's, he talks about how, one preacher that was preaching a different message at a different time, and a lot of people in his congregation were against it because they were old lights. And these is a term you should know. Old lights are people that believe in the traditional teachings. New lights are people that believe in the new teachings of the Great Awakening. Right, so that was really a division you see. There are people that didn't want to change, and then you see people that wanted to change into a new way of religion, okay? All right, so with that being said, we have 2 minutes left? So you should have these summaries completed, okay? And now the summaries will help you answer the last 4 questions. All right, so with the remaining time, you can work with your partner to try to get as many of these last questions finished, okay? And these are going to be just analysis questions based on the documents you read, all right?